the user CovertBrony about the Omnipolotics situation that's been going on over YouTube. Covert, would you like to introduce yourself? Well, as things stand right now, we're here to have a conversation. I ran across this gentleman in the comment section for the Omnipolitics channel for one of his videos, where I have to admit, you sort of stood out to me because you were seemed to be speaking to a guy whose story mirrored my own in a lot of ways, and you seem to be trying to push him into the direction of saying that Omnipolitics' opinion on pedophilia was nothing to worry about. And like I say, I'm giving you a right to reply here. I'm quite willing to have a conversation. Now, for anybody who may be watching or may have watched in the past, my story echoed this guy's in ways. My personal story is I'm a single father. I've got 2 children. Both my children were making accusations against my now ex-wife that she was being abusive towards them. And in my situation, my ex-wife, instead of answering the accusations, decided to move to initially another county of Scotland and then to England. She basically left the country to get away from the accusations. The guy that I saw you having discussions with seemed to me like I would describe myself as an overprotective father. The guy seemed to be in a similar situation. So would you like to give us your views on it? Well, yeah, I mean, I could definitely understand your point there. There has to be a line between somebody getting an accusation of being a paedophile and actually being a paedophile. I mean, just to give a rough example, in the area I live in, it's recently been put all across the newspapers that there's an individual who lives nearby to where I live who has recently appeared in court because he has been indecently assaulting girls between the ages of 11 and 15, if I remember correctly. Now, the accusation in itself, his name should not be associated with it until it's proven. Now, it has been proven. But I think I see what you mean there. You can't just add an accusation into a name and say, hey, this guy's a paedophile, for example. But the problem that we've got with the Omnipolitics channel is that Omnipolitics seems to be justifying paedophilia. Well, I mean, I would definitely say there's a lot of truth to it. I have to ask you, did you watch the broadcast he did with Andy Worski and Chris Worski, I think his name is? Right. Right, okay, so what you're saying here is that you haven't actually watched any on the politics stuff. You've just heard other people talking about it, and you've basically said, I think this guy needs to have somebody stand up for him. Right, well, I'll give you some objective facts. Omnipolitics put out a video saying that he was a paedophile. There was nothing wrong with being a paedophile. I think he initially called the video 3 reasons why pedophilia is okay or something like that. By the end of the video, he had listed 5 reasons why he thought pedophilia was okay. He was talking absolute nonsense, like saying that one of the arguments for pedophilia is that the girls are supposedly worried about getting pregnant, but the girls that he's interested in are prepubescent, so they can't get pregnant. So what's the problem? Things like that. Now, as I mentioned, Omnipolitics actually appeared on Andy Warski's podcast, where he was trying his best to... Excuse me, I'm knocking things off my desk. He was trying his best to normalise pedophilia. He had basically said, well, not even basically about it, he literally said that his preference in girls were girls between the ages of 3 and 12 with a personal preference of 7, because at 7, children start to apply logic to the world. Now, this is one of the things that was said, and the comment that you and I ran across each other in the comment section, the guy had lined out a scenario which I think it was something to do with, basically, it was another point that came up in Andy Warski's chat, where he was saying that one of the ways to protect kids against paedophilia is to have the parents involved. And the guy had put out a scenario basically saying that a girl, a friend of her father's, was allowing some sort of relationship, and then the father allowed the relationship to become sexual, and it was written in the perspective of the girl as later in life. So that's where he seemed to get a lot of the details from. So is there anything you would add to that? Is there any details here that are new to you, or... But that's what he says. I mean, it's one of these things where a lot of people are saying, yeah, the guy could be trolling. And granted, I'll give maybe a maximum of 5% chance that the guy is trolling. But the problem is, with trolling like this, I can't think of any sane person who would put their own face to it. Now, granted, at this point in time, if you go to Omnipolitics channel, there is the image of a young black boy. But that's not his face. And it's only changed since bigger channels on YouTube started to find his channel and say, basically, they think it's wrong. I mean, to give you a rough example, I'm going to line out some of the things that were in the Andy Warski chat, where Andy Warski sat down with himself, Chris, and Omnipolitics. And later on in the discussion, we did have Blair White join. But basically, Andy Warski initially, he says he didn't want to talk about it initially. But as the conversation progressed, he said, right, I'll have to tell you my situation here. I was abused as a child. At that point, Omnipolitics seemed to just have the opinion, oh, well, it must have been a kink. Because he described that the girl that abused him sat on his face and played with his junk, as Andy put it himself. Now, the only response that Omnipolitics would seem to give to that was, that seems like a kink to me. I'm going to concede that point to you, because that could very well be true. I mean, for all I know, I could be surrounded by 50 paedophiles on a daily basis and not know about it. because they've never acted on their paedophilia. But in the same breath, these people who I may be surrounded with that have never acted on their paedophilia also aren't advertising their paedophilia. If you see what I'm saying, because you seem to, I mean, a lot of the comments that I read through, you seem to do a lot of equation between paedophilia and homosexuality, saying that they're, I'm not sure that, I think you might have been trying to say that because homosexuality was once considered a mental disorder and paedophilia is a mental disorder, so we should treat these people the same. But to myself and people like me, I would consider that personally to be both a false dichotomy and offensive. Because if I'm dealing with a homosexual person, which I have done many times in my life, I can honestly say that two homosexual people in a relationship, one night stand, whatever they choose to do, it's two consenting adults. Whereas a pedophile is looking to have a relationship between themselves and a child. In the case of Omnipolotics, he would like to have a relationship with a child in the age range of between 3 and 12. Now, as I've said, I'm a single dad. I could sit and line out exactly what sex is to my kids, and especially my youngest, he isn't going to understand. What, who said, sorry? Yeah, well, granted, I mean, fair enough. You could possibly make the argument about maturity, but I would even say that 12's still too young. Don't get me wrong, I'm not exactly an idiot. The 80s, a lot of people that I know lost their virginity between the ages of 12 and 15. But the big difference there was they lost their virginity with people that were also between the ages of 12 and 15. You seem to be trailing off a lot in your answers here. I understand you're probably a bit nervous. The only thing I will say to you here is it's okay if you change your mind on your situation. Now, as I've said already, fair enough, if the guy had put out a video, in my opinion, saying, I'm a pedophile, I want help, I don't want to harm children, it would still be rather difficult to watch, but at least then you would be able to say, yeah, the guy, he wants to get help, he's trying to educate people that all pedophiles aren't monsters, for example, as you've said already. But what the guy did is he publicly put out videos saying, here's reasons why pedophilia is okay. The kids want it, they're sexually curious. And I'm sorry, but as I said, I've got two children, both between the age, both under the ages that he would be interested in anyway, but they're not particularly sexually curious. They're curious about the world, they're curious about life, but they're not sexually curious. Well, that's another thing as well, because I wouldn't exactly think it was an appropriate role model for anybody to be of the opinion I'm sexually interested in between a 3-year-old and a 12-year-old. It's leading down dark roads, in my opinion. Yeah, and I mean, for all I know at this stage, and I'm going to make this perfectly clear to yourself and to anybody who may be listening, as things stand, I honestly do believe that you have good intentions. I don't think that you are personally a paedophile, but I think you've heard about this channel where somebody has come out and said, I am a paedophile and this is why I think it's okay. You've only heard the initial part that said, I am a paedophile, and possibly thought these people are giving this guy a lot of grief when he's just trying to improve himself. So if there's anything here that has changed, feel free to talk about it. But it's not a disgrace or an admission of guilt or anything like that. If you're willing to sit there and say, hey, I heard about this Omnipolotics guy, seemed like a bit of a sympathy case. Problem is, I'm now being faced with facts I didn't have before, and now that I hear the facts, I'm less encouraged, disturbed, or you could be in the same place. That's why we're having the conversation. So, yeah, I do actually see what you're saying there. For what I'm picking up on what you're saying there, you're basically saying if there wasn't so much a stigma behind paedophilia, then more paedophiles would be able to come out and say, I need help. Is that what you're trying to say there? And that answer's fine. I actually, to an extent, I agree with that. Now, as a father myself, I hear the word paedophile towards somebody, and I'm not too happy about the idea of them being anywhere near my children. But I can see what you're saying. I will admit that that's an emotional response that comes from me. But the problem that we've got in this situation is, does it not skew your view on the individual when instead of saying, I'm a paedophile, I have a problem, he's saying, I'm a paedophile and here's why it's okay. Now, to me, I mean, we'll go back to the point about homosexuality. You're saying that it's the same as homosexuality. As I said already, false dichotomy, in my opinion, because when you're dealing with two homosexual people in a relationship, one night stand, whatever, you have two consenting adults. To me, it would be closer to psychopathy. Now, we know that psychopathy is a mental disorder, but do you really want to live next door to the psychopath who has tendencies to wear people's faces as a mask? Now, again, I can actually hear what you're saying, and I do personally believe, from the way you've been talking, that the reason why you're talking like this, you'll have to forgive me, I'm a bit short breath. As I mentioned to you when we spoke before, I am at the moment battling cancer. So, unfortunately, one of the side effects of my cancer drugs is scarring the lungs. So, I do get a bit short breath. So, you'll have to forgive me. But yeah, as I was saying, I honestly believe that you have your heart in the right place where you're thinking to yourself, people like this, they need to have the stigma removed. But the problem with that is, as I already mentioned with my analysis between a paedophile and a psychopath, for example, now there is help available for psychopaths. It's probably equally stigmatized where, I mean, it's the old Billy Connolly joke. If I was to go on television and tell people that God speaks to me, then they would send me money. If I walk into the mental ward and say God speaks to me, they'll not even let me home for my pajamas. So it's the same situation. If somebody goes public and says, I am a psychopath, I am a paedophile, they're instantly going to be judged as psychopath, paedophile, whatever. Yeah, but as I say, I mean, we're dealing with a situation where we have an individual here who is rather public on the fact that he thinks paedophilia is fine. And I'm actually going to try to absolve some of the flack that has been heading in your direction, because I have read through the comment section. A lot of people are saying that you yourself are a paedophile because you're a brony, which I don't know if you're a brony. I don't know if you're not. You seem to be a brony because of your stuff, but to me, that's got nothing to do with pedophilia. Like I say, it's one of these things where it's outside of the social norm to be in, for an adult male to be into girls' cartoons. But if that's what you want to watch, feel free. But in the same breath, I will quite happily defend your ability to watch My Little Pony or collect memorabilia or whatever you may do, because as an adult, that's your choice and it harms no one else. It's one of these cases where I don't think you're as abnormal as a lot of people would think. If you were to probably sit down with a lot of guys and say, is there any shows on TV that you've liked in the past that aren't necessarily for boys? We've all probably got our own guilty secret. I mean, I used to watch a thing called Maxie's World with my sister when I was maybe 8, because at the time I really didn't understand the difference between boys' programs and girls' programs. It was just lights and noise at that point, because I would, to be honest, I would be watching it and doing other things. And to be honest, some of the life lessons probably stuck. But it's also one of the life lessons that I took myself as a father, where if my kids want to watch something, I don't care. But again, I'm going to point out the fact that the reason why I'm pointing this out is I believe you've gotten a lot of stick online for being a brony that you don't deserve. Stereotypes behind being a brony, which the only thing that I could see a problem with is your opinion on omnipolitics. Now, as I've said, you seem like a compassionate guy to me, and you seem to be in the discussion with the situation about omnipolitics, either through ignorance or misinformation, where you just seem to think that this lad's a paedophile and trying to work through it, if you will. But as it stands, he seems to be trying to say, I'm a paedophile and this is why it should be okay. Now, does that change your opinion in any way? Because as I've said, I mean, there's no shame in that. I commend you for the fact that how caring you seem to come across here, because you seem to be thinking about the fact that this person needs help. And as I've mentioned already, I mean, I am personally a father. When I hear the word paedophile, it just puts me in instant defensive mode. I have to keep my children away from that. And you can probably understand that yourself. Well, like I say, I mean, I'm personally happy to send you links on. Sorry, could you say that again? Yeah, I could understand that. But as I've said, I mean, I'm quite happy to send you links on to. I could probably find a mirror of his original video that he took down, because it was the one that made him look the worst. It was literally saying 3 reasons why paedophilia should be okay, and he ended up with 5 reasons, and all of them were nonsense. And the discussion that he had with Andy Worski and Chris Worski, which is easy enough to find, just look on Andy Worski's channel. Now, again, this might be information that's new to you, but this is information that a lot of us have been following, which just, I mean, I will admit, following the story just does make me angrier and angrier, especially in the situation where we had a victim of abuse, Andy Worski, who didn't want to talk about it initially, but he eventually did talk about it because it was getting to that point where he was getting really quite heated because of the way the discussion was going. And Omnipolotics basically trying to say that children who are victims of abuse have no side effects, or they come out with positive side effects, if you will. Well, I'll give you that one. No two children are alike in personality, but I honestly can't see any way that anybody could defend paedophilia against a child. Now, like I say, I have two kids who were victims of abuse. And it's one of the things that I know was said to you by the person whose comment section we initially discovered each other in. Because his situation is very similar to my own, where because of the fact that his kids were abused, he had said to, I think it was you, said it to, it was either you or it was Omnipolitics, where he said, if you want to discuss damage to children or something like that, once you've been to see behavioural psychologists with your kids, once you've been to see this person, that person, other person, then you can come and have this conversation with me. But until then, I'm not interested in your opinion. I think it was something along the lines of that he said. Now, it's one of those cases where I have been through that situation. I've been through child psychologists. I've been to behavioural therapists with my kids. And, I mean, I'm using a physical violence example here. But I have seen the side effects of the physical violence where 1 minute my children can seem fine. And, I mean, it's probably compounded by the fact that my youngest son is suspected of suffering from ADHD. But as it goes, on a normal day, my kids can seem fine. But then I'll get phone calls from the school saying that my kids have been involved in a fight and it's, what were you fighting over? I was angry. Well, why were you angry? I don't know. Things like that shouldn't come out of a child's mouth, you know? Things like that do happen. I'm not going to deny that. I mean, I personally know a person who has served time because he went onto one of these dating apps and in fact, it wasn't even a dating app. I think it was BlackBerry Messenger. I think at the time it used to have some feature where you could find local people in groups. I'm not sure. I'm not exactly up on Blackberries because they're not my preferred brand. But like I say, I mean, supposedly if you're a BlackBerry, you could get into this BlackBerry Messenger that you could find people nearby. And at the time, the guy was single, started speaking to people on this BlackBerry Messenger thing, started speaking to a young lass who initially I think she claimed she was 18 or 16 or something like that. Now, being in the UK, I mean, 16 is the legal age of consent here, and the guy he's what, 26 now, so I think at the time he was maybe 21, so it was, I mean, 18 and 21 is kind of reasonable. Even 16 and 21 is kind of reasonable. But he started talking to this young lass anyway. And basically she said, I've got some photos, would you like to see them? And I'm not sure if it's just my own personal blinders, but if I was to go on a dating site, thing like that, somebody was to say to me, I've got a photo, would you like to see? I would assume that it was going to be a picture of the face. Something innocent, you know, just getting to know you stuff. Now, what this girl sent was a zip file containing images of her performing sexual acts on herself, on others. From there, what happened was the police got involved somehow. Her phone was taken. A judge, apparently, according to newspapers, a judge had said that this girl's mobile phone alone could fill a prison. Now, as it stood in that case, it turned out the girl was 13, maybe 14. Now, as I've said, don't get me wrong. I mean, the guy is not exactly in the right for not validating anything, but in my opinion, she sent the file to him unsolicited. If the story is to be believed, I mean, that could be wrong. I'm not familiar with that case, but I could pretty much guess how the case is going to go, at least according to public reporting. This girl's probably said that she's above the legal consent age wherever she is. And this individual said, hey, you want a picture of my dick? Do you want this? Do you want to suck this? Blah, blah, blah. And that's ended up in the wrong hands. And it's been a case of, oh, this person's sending paedophilic. Oh, look, I mean, it's one of the cases where, I mean, I've no problem to admitting to you, I've been there personally. I used to work nightclub security. We call it bouncers over here. I'm not sure what you would call it in America, but a lot of the women that I would be exposed to on a night-to-night basis were usually drunk, no use for a conversation. I mean, I'm kind of old-fashioned in the way I like to get to know a person before anything was to happen, I suppose you would say. Whereas standing at the front door of nightclubs and things like that, I mean, I could tell you the story about a time when a girl came into the club absolutely gone. She was so badly drunk that I couldn't let her in the club. If I let her in the club, believe it or not, I'd be breaking the law, because there's an old Scottish law that says it's illegal to be drunk on licensed premises. So if I let her in, I'd be breaking the law. So I had to say to her at the door, look, I'm very sorry, but you can't come in. So to that, she proceeded to say something along the lines of, you look all right, do you want to walk me home? Clamped onto my arm and then proceeded to try to drag me out of the club, saying that I was going to walk her home. And of course, at this moment in time, it's me and my friend on the door, who, I mean, I worked with my friend, that's why he was there. But he's standing laughing his head off at me because I've got this really uncomfortable look on my face because I don't want to go where. For one thing, if I get found out, I'll get sacked. For another thing, as I've already said, I'm kind of old-fashioned. I like a conversation before a bit of dirty, you know? But that could have easily been a bad situation where she could have been 15 and just came for the local play park and just had good makeup on. But the problem between that and the situation we're discussing here is we have an individual who's admitting to be a paedophile and telling people it's okay to be a paedophile. Now, as I've said, I mean, I could see the compassionate point that the likes of yourself has tried to say maybe the guy needs some help. Maybe he does. Problem is, if we go back to the psychopathy example, if the guy was a sociopath, or a psychopath, sorry, and was on YouTube videos saying, this is why I think it's okay for me to murder somebody, peel off their face and wear it like a mask, would you have the same level of compassion? Like I say, I mean, as I've already stated before, and yourself, we have stated the fact that if the guy's a paedophile and he confesses that he's a paedophile and needs help, he doesn't want to commit these acts, that's fine. I mean, I could even to a point understand if the guy had put out a video saying, I am a paedophile, this is my face. Please recognise that this is my face, because if I am ever left alone with a child, I am worried about what I might do. I would maybe have a little bit more sympathy for the guy there. But, I mean, as I've just said, if the guy was a psychopath saying this is why I think I should be allowed to cut people's faces off and wear them like a mask, is that the point where we say this person is psychopathic, they need help? Or is that the point where we say this person needs to be locked up? Well, again, I mean, to me, that's a rather simple point. I mean, before we went live here, I did mention the fact to you that I'm determined to try and stay an anonymous YouTuber as long as possible, because the opinions that I hold, for what I've seen of other people online, social justice warriors in my case can be an absolute nightmare. So I'm not putting my face to what I say, but I am putting my opinions out there. Now, I could make examples like Philip Moriarty, I think his name was, one of these guys who was anti anything to do with anonymity online. If you're going to come against me, you're going to use your proper name, your proper face, that sort of stuff. And then he got death threats against himself and his children that were considered to be credible. So to me, that just adds to the point. If you're going to share opinions like these online, you really don't want your face out there. This guy's sharing an opinion that says, I'm a paedophile, and he's putting his own face to it. So to me, that sort of restricts the idea of being a troll. Oh, listen, I'm not trying to brand you with the same brush here. I mean, as I've said already, I don't think that you're a paedophile. I don't think you're a paedophile apologist. I do actually think your intentions are pure here. But I also think your intentions are wrong, if you will. But again, that might just be the fact that I'm a father. You know, it then becomes a point. The idea of anybody hurting my kids is enough to get the fists clenched and ready to go, if you will. Well, it's one of these cases where a lot of people don't know what it's like. But again, it's one of these things. I mean, it's some of these opinions that I hold, like this whole nonsense about gender identity, and I mean, you'll have heard that going around the internet by now because it's been fucking everywhere. Where you're not supposed to call people he or she; it's supposed to be Zim and Zer, and yeah, I'm from a background where communication can be vital. I mean, you'd have to put yourself in the situation of being in a nightclub where the music's bouncing, there are hundreds of people. Are you going to be on a radio saying, right, we have just had an individual who has been stabbed, for example? Right, okay, we've got a stabbing victim. Do you need first aid? Yes, I need first aid. I also need a lookout for Zim. You know, what's the racial identity? Human. Is there any distinguishing marks? The guy had a haircut. You know, stuff like that. It makes no sense to the way my brain's programmed, because the way my brain's programmed, if I need assistance, I pick up my radio and I clearly announce on my radio I have a fight on the dance floor between two white males, one of which wearing a white cardigan, one of which wearing a blue t-shirt. You know, just quick, clear, and precise language. Sargon, I'll admit, being a man of the UK myself, I'm a big fan of Sargon personally. It's probably just because of the fact, I mean, I am these days, since the olden days where I could be a jughead, if you will. I didn't need to think about what was going on. These days, I've got 2 kids. I've got to worry about their future. So nowadays, I am more politically involved than I was before. But yeah, I mean, it's been a decent conversation. I actually get that impression from the conversation that I may have pointed out some details to you weren't necessarily aware of before. Is that the case? Yeah, I mean, like I said to you before, it's one of the reasons why I've given you this platform here. It might not be a very big platform. I've only got like 6 or 7 subscribers. And as I mentioned before, I mean, I am an anonymous YouTuber myself. I'm sticking to the Evil Scotsman avatar, at least for the moment, because, as I already mentioned, I mean, we've got examples for all sides of the fence, like Philip Moriarty, who credible death threats against his family. We've got the Woolly Bumblebee situation. That if you're a Bairn fan, you'll know what's going on there. Which, I'm sorry, but give Bairn the details. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about there. Well, I didn't have a live stream personally with him. It was I'm sure it was a video that he'd asked if you've got a YouTube channel, can anybody mirror this video? And I'll be honest, it was one of the videos that got me started on YouTube because I had the channel there to make comments on other people's videos. But it then became, for that point, I uploaded the Bairn video, and I was thinking to myself after that point, well, why don't I make my own content? Because, granted, I agree with a lot of what Bairn, Sargon, Amazing Atheist, things like that say. I don't agree with everything they say, and at times I've got a different perspective to what they say. So that was the point that I said to myself, well, why don't I just add my voice into the fray and let's see where it goes, if you will. But like I say, I mean, to me, the only way to advance civilization any further is by discussion. Like I say, I mean, I may not agree with what you've said here today, but I at least agree that you have the right to say it. And like I say, I mean, it may just be this impression that I'm getting off the conversation, but I honestly think that you didn't at least didn't know a lot of the stuff that was out there. And hearing about it, it seems to be making you think to yourself, well, hold on a minute, because obviously you've been a bit nervous coming on here. Now, as I said already, I mean, I used to work club security. I could be in a room full of 750 people and have to be the voice of authority in a room. So these days, I am what the Scots would refer to as a bit of a gobshite. So speaking in large groups doesn't really worry me. You seem to have been a bit nervous at the beginning here, but you seem to sort of get comfortable with the conversation. And then when we got into the meat of the conversation, you seem to have that moment of epiphany almost that said, well, this is what I believed, but this is what I'm being told, if you will. In some way correct, or is it a case of, well, I'm going to hang up this call and I'm still going to believe the same thing? Yeah, I see exactly what you're saying there. It is a case of, if you're doing text communication, you can sit back and think, how am I going to approach this argument? What's my best point? Look, done there, sir. And I mean, as I've said, I know for a fact that people in the comment section that I found you on were getting rather aggravated with you because they seemed to think that you were trying to defend Omnipolotics and his paedophile opinions, that this is why it's okay. But I honestly wonder if you've seen that video where he was basically saying, this is why I'm a paedophile and this is why I think it's okay. Have you seen that video? Well, that's the beauty of it, because it wasn't actually taken down. He took it down himself. As in the discussion with Andy Worsky and Chris Worsky and Blair White, he had said that he wanted to take the video down because he had found some problems with it. Now, personally, I could point out a lot of problems in his video. Most of them were the ones that were saying this is why it's okay to be a paedophile. Yeah, like I say, I mean, he has done a lot of like live shows and stuff like that now, where he has went online and said pretty much the same thing. This is why I think it's okay to be a paedophile. One guy in particular that, well, I do keep going back to because he is the best example I can give is Andy Worsky. And as I said already, I mean, Andy Worsky, he has been open in the past about the fact that he was abused as a child because he does speak with a stutter. And he's spoken about in the past the fact that he speaks with a stutter because his babysitter, when he was young, used to beat the ever-loving shit out of him. And as I've said, as things were progressing with the live show that he took part in, it seemed to be a case of the longer. In fact, I'll tell you what I'll do. Well, it's one of the unfortunate points. I mean, to me, I don't think you should be hated for compassion. It's maybe just the way that I see it, but you seem to come across as a compassionate individual. You're somebody who I believe to be wrong, but you at least seem to be compassionate. Now, if you give me 2 seconds, what I'll do is... perfect. Right. What I'll do is I'll try and share screens with you here. Right, so you should see an infinite mirror. Right, so this was the section that a lot of people are getting out of whack about. Sorry, could you say that again? You barely hear it. Hold on a second. I'll see if I can boost the audio. Looks like that's as good as it's going to get, so you might just have to suffer it in this. Right, I'm going to pause the video here because I'm not wanting to get hit by a copyright strike or anything like that. But I think we've got the gist. Which you'll probably see my point here. I mean, as it stands in that podcast, that was Andy Worski basically recounting his own experience as a 4-year-old. And the response he gets from Omnipolitics is, well, did your parents ever tell you that paedophilia was wrong? Did you know the negative connotation of paedophilia? I think is what he said. Again, it's one of these things, as a parent, that's not the kind of thing that I discuss with my children. I can't think of any parent who would sit down and say, by the way, if these people called paedophiles, if they ever come near you, they may do this, that, and the next thing to you, and it's bad. I can't think of a single parent that would sit and say that sort of thing to their child, but that's instantly where his mind goes, is, did you know the negative connotations? Which, again, I make the point, what 4-year-old would understand the negative connotations of paedophilia? Look, yeah, I'll admit that one personally. But the thing that kids are able to learn isn't sexual. I mean, I've got 2 kids in the next room with me here that can work power tools. As long as I'm present, don't get me wrong, I'm not exactly throwing wood at my boys and saying, I need to make these cuts. You do them for me. They get to help me use power tools. Now, because they want to understand how the power tools work, but I'm not going to leave them unattended with my power tools. My youngest son's a bit at risk even when I'm helping him, because the number of times I've let him help me and he's nearly taken my thumbs off because he doesn't understand. I mean, I could tell him as many times as you like, if the blade's spinning on the circular saw, do not bring the lever down until everything's lined up and your hands are out the way. But he doesn't care. He just wants to have fun and cut through the wood because it's cool. I mean, there's a young brain, it just magically disappears. I mean, you and I, we're of an age where we could say, well, the reason why the wood disappears is because the spinning blade is acting like a chisel and scraping away the wood. It's nothing magical to us, but to my 7-year-old son, it's magic. But that's my point. I mean, that it shows that children can learn. Obviously, children can learn, or there would be no point in having schools. But the reason why we're teaching these things to kids is to prepare them for the future. Now, doesn't matter how much you can teach a child about what is sexual, blah, blah, blah. The big thing that you have to remember here is, what can they understand? And as I've said, I mean, my son knows, he has been taught how to use drill press, circular saw, just pick a tool that's in my shed. My son knows how it works. He knows he's not allowed to use it to help him use it, but he doesn't understand why. That's the big point to me, is the understanding. So how would you respond to that one? And I mean, as I've said to you before, I'm not like jumping for, you're defending a paedophile. Nah, that's not my intention here. As I've already said, I actually have suspicions here that your heart is in the right place, but you've picked the wrong target to defend, if you will. Because I think you've went into this not 100% informed, and I'm showing you things that Omnipolitics himself has put out. And I think at times it has given you a bit of pause. But again, I mean, we're working on Andy Worski's experience of being abused as a child. And we're working on my experience with my children who were abused and the fact that they're children. So, as I've said, I mean, people are saying that kids are maturing faster these days. That could be true. I don't know. My kids are just interested in climbing trees. They're not interested in sex. Yeah, I mean, I could definitely say that. But at the same time, I mean, my kids have very little filter with me. Probably because of the fact that I have very little filter with them. And when I say filter, I mean, yeah, there are things I don't tell the kids, you know. But a lot of the things that other parents sort of hum and haw about working their way around to speak to the kids, I don't. I mean, as things stand in Scotland right now, my children are doing sexual education in primary school. And a lot of the parents that I've spoken to about it are very prudish and, oh, I'm worried about them coming home with homework and asking what this, that, and the next thing is. If it's homework related and my children ask me a question, I answer it. I just don't think about it. And again, that leads to, there's going to lead to understanding in the future. But there's a difference between knowledge and understanding. But that may just be, again, personal experience, because as things stand, I have qualifications in both electronics and computing. And the first time I went to college, when I got a lot of qualifications in electronics, I was able to attain the knowledge without the understanding, if you will. You know, I knew enough to get past the tests, but I didn't understand enough. The second time I went to college, because of the fact I had this knowledge, it actually made going to college easier the second time. But because I was more interested in the computing aspect, I was able to get the understanding better. So to me, I mean, that just translates down to my kids. So would you agree with Omnipolitics when he says that kids are sexual beings, that, you know, things like that? Well, I would agree with that. 0% personally, but we'll just have to take that as a difference. Now, the other thing that I would raise to you is the point that, I mean, I just showed you the clip of Andy Worski's podcast where Andy describes he was abused as a child. I mean, I don't think we got quite as far into the clip, but he does speak about the fact that he was abused as a child. He got to a point where he was, I think he said he was 12, he was starting to experiment when everything came back about what had happened to him. So we've got an individual here who's dealing with somebody who has been through sexual abuse as a child and has said, I hit 12 years old and the light came on in my mind where everything came flooding back, because that was the point where I had enough understanding as to what had happened that I knew it was wrong. And the best sort of reactions that this Omnipolitics guy can give are like, oh, well, did you understand the negative connotations behind pedophilia? Had your parents explained that to you? I mean, again, that to me just goes back to the psychopath living next door. Psychopath living next door, I have no problem with that if he's taking medication. Psychopath living next door, putting out videos on the internet saying this is why I should be able to wear the neighbour's face as a mask. That's the point where I want to move. So how would you view that sort of thing? Sorry, you broke up there a bit. Could you repeat that, please? Who, Omnipolitics? Well, you're saying about the sincerity. Are you going back to the point that Omnipolitics might be trolling? Well, I mean, like I say, we have covered that. I've said that I don't believe he's trolling because it doesn't matter how extreme the troll, nobody's going to say something like that as trolling and put their own face to it. I mean, the guy seems to be that comfortable with the fact that he's a pedophile that when he was on the Worski podcast, he had a friend in the room with him, apparently, because it got to the end of the podcast where, I mean, to be honest, I don't think the guy went there to have a conversation. I honestly believe that the guy went there with the intention to change minds as to this is why pedophilia should be okay. And he failed miserably. There's no way around about it. He failed miserably. He was doing things, as I showed you. Andy Worski went through his points and said, this is what happened to me as a child. And the best response that he got was, well, did you understand the negative connotations of pedophilia? Had your parents explained it to you? And he also then asked, can I ask how you were abused? And Andy said, well, yeah, she sat in my face and she played with my penis. And he said, well, that sounds like a kink to me. To me, that just seems like totally discounting the point of the victim. And at that point being the victim of sexual abuse. And this guy is basically sitting there saying, oh, well, that sounds like a kink. Doesn't matter if it's a kink to me. The bottom line is she did it to a 4-year-old. So you see my point in that one, where it just seems a bit strange that he would take this position at all. I mean, as I've said before, I mean, if you think I'm wrong, feel free to tell me that you think I'm wrong. Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things where, like I say, a person who's aware enough of the fact of their own mental conditions wouldn't advocate for the mental conditions. I mean, me personally, I suffer from depression, for example. But I'm not going to walk down the street saying that depressed people should be left to their own devices, blah, 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 for example. Because me as a depressed person, I know for a fact I shouldn't be left to my own devices, especially the fact I've got 2 kids. Because before I was diagnosed with depression, and before I started taking regular medication for my depression, I was seriously thinking about suicide. Because of the things that have happened to my children, I have blamed myself for it for a long time. And there was a point where I had it in my head that my kids would be better off without me. And I had planned down to the detail my own suicide. But now that I'm medicated, I can honestly say I'm in a better place. But I'm not going to walk down the street saying depressed people who want left alone should be left alone, because I was a depressed person who wanted to be left alone. And if I had been left alone, I would be dead. My children would be without their father or their mother. Worst case scenario there would have been that my children would have been returned to their mother under some strange loophole in law and could possibly now be getting abused because my mental illness was telling me everybody would be better off without me. So looking at it from that point of view, I can't see a person who suffers psychopathy who is aware enough going down the street saying psychopaths should be free to do as they see fit, because they shouldn't. And the same guys, I can't see any paedophile who's self-aware enough walking down the street saying paedophiles should be left to their own devices, because they shouldn't. Now, we can go back to your point again about homosexuality, because you had made the comparison before about homosexuals being similar to paedophiles because of it being a mental condition, which That one I'm not sure about. I have heard arguments about homosexuality being a mental condition. There was theories that came out many moons ago that homosexual men were created by a lack of father's guidance, if you will. You know, it was like they were trying to replace their father with a sexual partner, if you will. Which I don't know if that's true or not. There may be some truth in it. I seriously don't think so, because we've got too many examples these days. One famous example that I could point out would be Stephen Fry. Stephen Fry, openly homosexual, his brother isn't, but they were raised the same. So there's probably more to it there. So, like I say, I mean, to me, it's a false dichotomy to say homosexuality is the same as paedophilia, because they're both born either homosexual or paedophilic. But, like I say, homosexuals, you've got two consenting adults. Paedophilia, you've got one consenting adult and one child who's too young to understand. If you see where I'm going. So how would you balance that in your head? Would you... Is this the point where you're now saying to yourself, maybe I shouldn't have defended this guy without doing more research? Or is this the point where you're saying to yourself, I'm going to come across bad in the stream if I say what I'm really thinking? Because feel free to say whatever you're thinking. Well, I mean, that's the problem with that. We instantly hit a brick wall when we make this analysis, to me, because, I mean, as you probably figured out by the way I talk about the situation, I am not homophobic in the slightest. I have no problem with the way anybody else wants to live their life. The only stipulation I put on that is as long as they're not hurting other people. Pedophilia has the onus there of hurting somebody who doesn't understand. And the worst it is, to me, pedophilia is worse than a lot of problems because it doesn't just hurt them at the time. As we've got with the example for Andy Worski, we've got numerous examples where at the time, yeah, these kids are hurt, they have problems, but they eventually forget until they get old enough to realise that it was wrong. And then you're dealing with elements of PTSD at that point. I mean, as Andy put in his, I mean, I know a girl who was abused, and she basically said the same thing. When she got to that age where she could understand that what happened to her was wrong, it was all she could think about. It was intruding in her thought process, which is PTSD. There's no other way around about that. So, like I say, I mean, understanding that, are you still willing to nail your colours to the mast and say, this individual needs help? Or are you more thinking along the lines of what I think you were thinking, where your average paedophile will say, who doesn't wish any harm to anybody, has a sexual attraction to children, understands that it's not the right way to go about it, does not want to act on these, but is in the mindset that if I come forward as a paedophile, I'm going to have to face the social stigma. So are you working on the premise that any paedophile who wants the help should get the help? Or are you still going to defend Omnipolotics and the fact that he says, I'm a paedophile and I'm proud and it's fine? And as I've said to you before, I mean, to me, you come across in that aspect as being rather compassionate towards people. You seem to, at least with the conversations I've had with you, to have the mindset that if the stigma on paedophilia is gone, then these people are more likely to get help than hurt children. But the problem with that is that paedophilia is hurting children. So if the stigma was to all but disappear tomorrow, and I was to be walking down the street, and I'll just use the example of the individual who has been in the local papers, who has recently been convicted of sexual assault. If I see that guy in the street, I'm not going to just leave the kids to their own devices if they're walking ahead of me or whatever. That's the point where I'm going to take their hand to make sure that nothing happens. That stigma is never going to go away, in my opinion. Well, like I say, I mean, as a father, I would say that that's never going to go away, personally. I mean, there is a restriction to the amount of stigma. And as I've already said, I mean, I know a person who was accused of, I think it was statutory rape. He was accused of, and he was jailed for it. But the actual story behind what had happened was, as we discussed before, met a girl on a messenger service. She then proceeded to send him a zip folder full of naked pictures, sexual acts, blah, blah, blah. Turned out she was below the age of consent. And to me, that case was severely problematic. It should never have been charged, because even the judge said that the girl's mobile phone contained enough names to fill a prison. Now, maybe it's just my way of thinking, but if the girl had 200 names, I think it is, she had in her phone, that tells me that she's going out looking for people. They're not looking for her. But I could be wrong. I mean, I also have the point between that and friends of mine, their daughter has a brain tumour. She was born with a brain tumour. It's not going to affect her quality of life any more than it does now, we'll say, but she is left with learning difficulties because of it. Now, as people keep describing her to me, but because of the fact that I've known her since she was 6 months old, I think it was, I met her, I don't see it. But supposedly she's busty and blonde and beautiful and exactly what all boys want. And she was having a conversation, her mum had told me she was having a conversation with a boy, and the boy had said to her something along the lines of, "Would you like to lick my lollipop?" I think was the phrase. Now, you and I, both being adults, will know exactly what he was making the hint towards. She didn't. So she was sending messages to him saying, "Yeah, I'll lick a lollipop. That sounds good to me." So, I mean, there's examples that we could give at all walks of this. And like I say, I mean, I could give the example of the guy who didn't know the age of the person he was talking to, believed she was over 18. We've got the example of my friend's daughter who has a brain tumour and learning difficulties and doesn't understand. But, I mean, that one's an even worse example to me because she has the understanding of maybe a 5 or 6 year old, from my understanding. I could be wrong in the numbers here. But according to what Omnipolitics is saying, between 3 and 12 should be okay. So she would be okay. Would you want to defend this girl who is mentally handicapped, or would you want to say, the guy just wants a blowjob? Well, I personally wouldn't consider that to be a grey area because, for one thing, the girl's under the age of consent. The grey area, yes, I will admit, there is a serious grey area. To me, the guy with the phone situation should not have gone to prison because she had over 200 names in her phone of people that she was sending explicit messages to, and the fact that the guy had never actually physically met her yet by the time the police got involved. He had only been speaking to her through BlackBerry Messenger, I think it was. So as far as I'm concerned, he shouldn't have gone to jail. She should have been sat down and spoke to seriously, and her parents should have been informed. Mobile phone should have been gone at that point, in my opinion. But like I say, I mean, that girl was obviously sexually mature. She was ready for it. But somebody should have sat her down and said, look, for one thing, we're not stupid. You're sexually mature. You're going to do it. So please be safe. But for another thing, don't try to lure in guys that are older than you because you could ruin their lives. You know, like I say, I mean, if the guys had known the actual age you and were continuing on down the path, that's wrong. That's statutory rape. But with the fact that she was contacting these people, that then hits a grey area for me. But like I say, I mean, going back to my friend's daughter, she's 15 now, I believe, has the mental understanding of a 5-year-old, which, according to Omnipolotics, a 3-year-old would be fine for sex. So he would probably say she would be okay. She's maybe a bit old for him, but would you say that she should be left her own devices with older guys, or does she need a bit of protection there? Yeah, I would agree with that personally. Because of the fact she's got the mental problems, it does make it more difficult. I mean, as I've said, I am going to have to deal with that one day. I'm going to be dealing with the horny 13-year-olds, and I am going to have that conversation with them at some point. But it's going to be a case of, I'm not stupid. I know you're going to do it. Careful, that sort of thing. But in the same breath, if I found out that my boys were sleeping with a 25-year-old girl, I'm not going to be happy about that because that's predatory to me. It is a weird thing because when I was married, I had a stepdaughter, and I still consider the stepdaughter to be like a daughter to me. And I can tell you now, if my boys are going out and I know that there may be sex involved, they'll probably just get the majority of make sure you're protected. Now, bugger off. But when it comes to my stepdaughter, it then becomes a point where if you take advantage of my daughter, I will break your face. So that is a massive double standard on my part. But I'm not worried about it, if you will. I'm quite happy to point out to my daughter's boyfriends that my fist's half the size of their head. You know? But that just seems to be more along the lines to me of protective instinct, because we are more protective towards women than men. Let's be fair on that one. It's one of the things that I'm eventually going to speak about on my channel, hopefully. We've got things in the Western world like the Duluth model, for example. Do you know what the Duluth model is? Basically, in most Western countries that employ the Duluth model, if there's a domestic violence situation where the police are called, the man is automatically assumed to be at fault under the Duluth model. Pretty much, it is very much a guilt until proven innocent situation. And it's one of the things that I'm comfortable enough, because my channel's anonymous, that I could say I have been on the negative side of that. Because one of the reasons why my marriage broke down is because my now ex-wife was into drugs. And it got to the point where, I mean, just to give you a rough idea, I'm approximately 6'2". I used to be built like a tank, but I'm pretty fat these days, as you can probably figure out by the fact that my old avatar was Fat Bastard for the Austin Powers movies. So, big guy, pretty muscular at the time, but I got assaulted by my now ex-wife, and it was literally the straw that broke the camel's back for me. I told her that I was going to pack up myself and the children and leave, and she phoned the police. The police arrived. She had not a scratch on her. I was scratched up, bleeding, and I was the one that left in the police van that night. Because she batted eyelids and said, "Oh, but officer, he hit me. I had to hit him back. Look at the size of him." I mean, anybody can see the point. I mean, I've never hit a woman in my life, and I don't intend to start now. I've been accused of it now by my ex-wife, but I've never done it. But under the Duluth model, the police that arrived at the house basically, to my mind, ignored the evidence that was available to them. Because, as I say, there was a male officer and a female officer, if I remember correctly. Now, because it was a domestic violence situation, we were split up instantly, which wasn't too difficult because at that point in time, I had a bag in my hand and I was throwing stuff in it because I was determined I was leaving that night. That was my plan. I was going to leave. I was taking the children with me to make sure they were out of harm's way. The policeman that was trying to deal with me, I basically said to him, look at the state of me. I'm bleeding. I'm covered in scratches. We had a minor argument and she went for me. Now, like I say, at this moment in time, there was a female police officer. Because of the accusations that I had just made, in my mind, it would not have been the slightest bit difficult for that male officer to ask for the female officer to speak in the hall or something like that, for example. Say, right, here's the situation. We have the male in the other room. He looks physically in a state. What I want you to do is ask if she has any injuries. If she has any injuries, get her to show them to you. But she wouldn't have been able to do because she wasn't injured. And like I say, I mean, to me, that would have been a nail in the coffin. But under the situation that we've got in the Western world, which you would never believe if you listen to the third wave feminists these days, women are hated and are under men in every situation. But as I've already said, I mean, I was physically injured. Nothing, I mean, like I've said already, I mean, I'm 6'2", used to be built like a tank, used to have a job where it would be a regular thing to catch a chair or catch a bottle or a glass or something like that. So, got to be pretty tough for that sort of thing. So it was nothing that I couldn't handle. But at the same time, I mean, we've got this double standard in our society that says that women have to be protected at all costs. So just to try and loop it back to where this originally started from, yeah, I could definitely see the double standard. Well, that's the thing, because, again, I mean, I've got my stepdaughter that I still think of like a daughter. She was kicked out by her mother. She ended up living by herself at 17 years old. And she had a boyfriend. The boyfriend, as it turned out, was hitting her. And it was a very typical situation where, I will admit, I mean, she was coming around to visit me and her brothers, and I never saw anything. I should have seen it, but I didn't see it. But she did the typical thing. I mean, somebody else reported that he went to court. She actually went to court in his defence and said, "Oh, he's never lifted a hand to me, officers," which was wrong. And in that situation, the Duluth model was a benefit to her, but it's not a benefit to everybody. So, like I say, I mean, I'm not going to totally condemn the double standard. And yeah, I'll be the first one to say it. A lot of the stuff that I'm telling you here is anecdotal evidence. It's things that have happened to me. It's the way that I see the world now because of the way I've been treated. But at the end of the day, it wasn't as bad as it could have been, because if my now ex-wife had decided to push for charges and say, oh, well, he's a doorman, he knows exactly how to hit me and not leave a bruise because he's learned that working as a doorman, I could have went to court, I could have been convicted, I could have been put to jail, my children would have been left with an abusive woman. Luckily for me, she was more interested in getting her next fix than making any arguments. So I've not necessarily hit the worst. I mean, go digging hard enough on the internet, you will find instances where there was one that broke my heart, maybe last year, I think it was, guy who had been sentenced to prison for rape and was released because the girl who had accused him of rape had went and said, I made the whole thing up. In fact, it was his daughter, it was either his daughter or his stepdaughter, basically admitted that she made the accusation to get attention. And this guy, while he was in prison, his mother had committed, I can't remember if she'd committed suicide actually, or if she had just died of natural causes. But either way, he wasn't able to be there at the end of his mother's life because this girl wanted attention. Dig hard enough into anybody and you'll find something you disagree with. Like I say, I've been using YouTube for maybe 10 years now in total. Followed The Amazing Atheist for day one because maybe 10 years ago now was the point where I was away for religion, but I didn't understand atheism, if you will. And I think it was things like The Amazing Atheist that opened my eyes to the fact that I am an atheist. But I've been watching the guy for 10 years, and there are videos that come out regularly where I'm sitting thinking to myself, you're talking shit. But even I'll admit, I don't care if I'm thinking to myself, you're shit because he's genuinely wrong, or do I think he's talking shit because I live in Scotland and he lives in America? It could just be a difference of perspective there, you know? But either way, look at some hard enough, you'll find something you disagree with. Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think we would all agree with Christian values. At the end of the day, I mean, I've got my own suspicions on how religion would have come around. I mean, I could imagine 2,000 years ago, for example, it must have been absolutely horrible to live around people. You know, you've got something that, I don't know, you've whittled stuff out of tree bark or whatever, and so says, oh, that's nice, I'll have that. So, to me, a lot of the religions were probably based on empathy, which people didn't want to admit. That's a case of, oh, it comes to God. No, to me, there's probably been a case of we would have ended up with a society based on empathy. Because, for example, I mean, I grew up with a sister. And let's just say, for example, I was to come across my sister in the field being sexually assaulted by a group of men. I then see that and I know that sexual assault of a woman is wrong. But to the other people, the people that assaulted her, it's not wrong. So you would have ended up with a society that understands what right and wrong is because of damage, which is where religion, then the religious leaders would have then come in to say, you know, these are the morals of the current day, I suppose you would say. And here's all the stories as to why you're not allowed to do X, Y, and Z, because if you do it, you'll go to hell. You know, that to me is probably how religion would come around. Well, that's the problem. I mean, these days religion is an easy way to understand, because you've got two options in this life. You can either do your own research and have your own opinions, or you can listen to a book that says God says it's good, God says it's bad. I mean, it's the old argument where Christians say that being an atheist is the easiest thing ever because you're accountable to nobody. Whereas being an atheist, I understand something that they don't, because a Christian can do something that I can't. If they want forgiven, they get on their knees and pray to God and say, please forgive me for accidentally running down that person with my car. Me as an atheist, I can't go to God and say, please forgive me. If I want forgiven, I've got to go to the person that I wronged. But like I say, I mean, that sort of, it leads us back into the conversation, I suppose you could say, because we have a society now where, because of harm, we understand that things like pedophilia is wrong. And we know that men are physically stronger on average. I mean, it's just being a sexually dimorphic species. Men are stronger, women are smarter. It's, if you were to really break it down. It's the old thing. I mean, if you go back to tribal human beings, you would see something really quite common where if, for example, we've got a root that may be edible and may be poisonous, before a woman cooks it, she'll give it to the man. If the man dies, she knows not to cook it. So it's the whole thing about men have always been expendable, if you will, because women can make more men, men can't make more women. But like I say, I mean, again, we've got this situation where we've got a society based on empathy. And taking it back to your point about homosexuality, there was a time where homosexuality was added in as a mental disorder because people believed it did wrong, it did harm. And these days it doesn't. It's known not to. Yeah, 50 years ago, especially in places like Scotland, I mean, working in club security, there was one guy who used to come into one of the clubs that I worked in, who used to tell us quite proudly about when he was a doorman, and if they were short on money, there was a public toilet that was known in the area where he lived, that was where the homosexuals at the time would meet up for anonymous sex. So it wasn't uncommon for people to burst into this public toilet, beat them up and take their money, because they were known it would be like the safest robbery ever, if you will. Because what are they going to do? They're going to go to the police and say, officer, I've been robbed. Okay, right, we'll take down some details. So do you know who robbed you? I don't know. Right, okay. Unknown assailant. Where were you robbed? Such and such public toilet. Hold on a minute, that's where the poofs go. What were you doing in that toilet? Oh, well, I was desperate for the toilet and I had to. Aye, likely story. And because of the fact they would then be known to be homosexual, the police at the time would probably have said, well, I can investigate this woman who's had her handbag stolen and can't feed her kids for a week, or I can investigate this poofter who's been robbed. I'll maybe get to the poofter eventually, if you will. So what's understood now is the fact that the attitude towards homosexuality was causing. So attitudes changed. But the problem is that it's always going to be known that pedophilic acts towards children are going to be harmful. Well, as I've said, I mean, attitudes definitely change. Things that were not acceptable 50 years ago are commonplace these days. I mean, everybody's heard the stories about back in the early 1900s. Let's use it as an example. Girl would get herself pregnant and she would be sent away to a special school for 10 months, where what was actually happening was she was sent away to have the baby. The baby would then be either adopted or put in an orphanage. Nowadays, the stigma against single mothers is gone. So if a girl catches herself pregnant It's more understood these days that these people need help. But just then the point where it becomes open to abuse. Because we now have an epidemic of single mothers. Well, epidemic, because that may not be fair these days, but there was at one time considered to be an epidemic of single mothers who were intentionally getting themselves pregnant so that they could get housing benefit, they could get public housing, they could get income support. You know, so basically they would get a free house, free money, not have to go to work. So it opens up a system to abuse, which unfortunately, if you were to do any sort of normalisation to paedophilia, that's what I think would happen. I mean, for example, if we were to say, put in a situation where if paedophiles were to go to the local NHS service and say, I am a paedophile and I need help, they would be given assistance, they would be given specialist housing. But how many times are we going to get guys that are caught? And, well, people, I'm not going to restrict it to guys, I'm going to say people. How many times are we going to end up with people who are caught in paedophilia that are going to turn around to judges and say, I'm very sorry, I couldn't contain myself, it's a recognised condition, can I please go to one of the special homes? And then once they're in this special home, there'll be some loophole where it's voluntary, for example, and they can sign themselves out. So how do we work around that? Well, like I say, I mean, the unfortunate thing is a lot of the stigmas that used to be held in society, it was thought that it was bad for people. But the stigmas were self-caused, if you will. Because homosexuality was considered to be a bad thing because they were never going to have a full life, they were never going to have children, they were never going to have, you know, the normal life, if suppose you would call it at that time. Whereas nowadays we are able to look at it and say, consenting adults, love is love. These people can live just as fulfilled a life as parents can. These people can even be parents these days. I mean, there's routes open to them, there's adoption, there's artificial insemination. You know, do you see my point? But I don't think there's ever going to be a time where what Omnipolitics is put out for, because one of the things he said, as I mentioned before on the Worski podcast, where he said that if the parents were involved, for example, it would be okay to have a relationship with a child. So what he's expecting to become the norm, we'll say, just on what he's said, is that he's able to, I don't know, hang around at a public play park for however long, find a child between the age of 3 and 12 and think, I quite like her. Go and strike up a conversation with the mother or the father, get to a point the mother or the father is all right with him acting in a sexual manner towards their child. I mean, as I say, the example that the guy gave on the video, I actually think was quite good, where he wrote the hypothetical situation out and basically said that when this child hits 12 years old, just as the example that was given to Andy Worski, I think, this child hits the age where they can understand that it's wrong, and it then hits them like a truck. So not only did they have to deal with the confusion, the fear, what was happening to them at the time, and yeah, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt, they got over that. But then they hit the age where they're old enough to understand that what happened to them was wrong, and it hits them like a truck again, and they're then dealing with aspects of PTSD. So how do you think that Omnipolitics could defend that point and say, What, if the relationship was ongoing, she's not going to realise that she doesn't like it, or? But even going back to that point, I mean, as a father myself, if a girl at 16 years old was to approach me and say, "Your young boy there, I think he's rather attractive. What would you say about me striking up a relationship with him?" I would probably say, "Me and you are going to have words, and most of yours will be, ow, ouch, please stop hitting me." You all right there? I wonder if you crashed out there, because it wasn't exactly a very cogent point. Or are you just trying to think about and try to let that process? And as I've said before, I mean, people are going to accuse me of trying to get you an out here. But I wouldn't be in the slightest bit surprised if you've went to this channel under different pretenses for everybody else. And like I've said before, I mean, I've read through the comment section on some of his videos, and if it was any other video, it would have been cancerous. But I could see exactly, because in the content of his videos, I can see exactly why people are attacking him in the way that they are. Well, even at that, I mean, we're here having a conversation at this point in time, but I could tell you that I can see two perspectives on this one, and one of them is very wrong. And one of them's omnipolitics. Which is obviously the one that's very wrong. Because, like I say, I mean, in my mind, there's no way that you can rectify that in your own mind or in anybody else's to say that there's any way paedophilia could be excused or whatever. I mean, like I say, I've got two boys myself. If I had a daughter at that age and I was to get some guy come up to me in the play park and say, "I think your daughter's really quite attractive and I'd like to ask her out sometime," what would you say to that? I would probably say, "Get the hell away from my child." And I can honestly say at that point in time, if, as I've just described, if this person was to approach me and say, "I think your daughter's quite attractive, would you mind if I asked her out at some time?" I think the first question would be, "Have you got a child here?" Because at the point where he answered to me, "No, I don't have a child here," that'd be the point where I would shout at the loudest my lungs would allow me, "This guy has just asked if he could have a date with my 6-year-old daughter," we'll say. Because that would be the point where I would make sure every parent in the area knows this guy's face. And like I say, I mean, to an extent, I can actually understand where that point comes from an extent, because we do have that tradition that, for example, if you're going to marry a girl, you have to ask her father's permission first. You know, that older. But to me, there's a massive difference. Again, it just comes down to age of understanding. If you want to marry my 25-year-old daughter and you're coming asking for permission from me to marry my daughter, well, they'd actually refer to it these days more as your blessing, because you didn't give permission. It's up to her at the end of the day if she's going to get married. It's just considered polite these days to ask the father's permission or to ask for the father's blessing. But again, I mean, like I say, that it comes down to just a situation that's a false dichotomy, because we're dealing in a situation there where you have, let's say, a 25-year-old lady against a 6-year-old girl. You know, a guy comes out to me and says, your 6-year-old's rather attractive and I'd like to get to know her better. What would you say to that? I would say, get the hell away from my child, you know? But boyfriend of my daughter comes to me and says, your daughter and me have been dating for a year, 2 years. I love her to bits. I want to marry her. Will you give me your blessing? And I'll be the first one to admit I'm not exactly shy. You've probably figured that part out for yourself right now. If I think the guy's a good guy and they're a good fit, I'll give him my blessing. If I think the guy's a scumbag who's just living off her money, for example, I'll no give my blessing. Yeah, exactly. But at the end of the day, it's still not my choice. It's her choice. And if it goes wrong and she figures out that it's wrong and leaves him, I'll be there to help pick up the pieces. But I'm not going to throw it to the wolves, if you will. Which is the same as I see the situation as Omnipolotics points out, where a father can be involved. I'm not going to throw my daughter to the wolves. I'm not going to say, well, you've been dating this guy for 6 months and I think it's time that you two made it physical. So you go up the stairs and you take all your clothes off and he'll tell you what to do. Aye. Again, it comes down to understanding. You know, if you've got two kids that are about the same age, I mean, look, I've been there myself with my son. He's very much like me, where he doesn't particularly care the sex of a person. It's mere attitude than sex. I'll be friends with men, women, whatever. He's pretty much the same, and I've been through the whole thing where I mean, there was a place where we used to live, and he had a friend that was convinced that they were going to get married and they were going to have 12 kids, and she was going to go out to work and he was going to be looking after the kids. And it's one of these cases where if they were older, I'd be saying, you need to get out of this, just leave her alone. But at the time, they were 6 years old, you know, it's no something to worry about. But if that was the same situation where the lassie that wouldn't leave my son alone was 16 years old, I would have a serious problem at that moment. So what I'm going to do at this point in time is I'm actually going to stop talking for a while and give you the floor to try and explain anything that you might be thinking, because, I mean, as I've said, I'm pretty convinced that you haven't had on the details that have been floating about it there. And I think I've highlighted more than a few of the details to you in this conversation. So I honestly think you might have changed opinions on a lot of things. But I just want to give you the floor to say whatever, you know, this is why I agree with Omnipolitics, this is why I disagree with Omnipolitics. I mean, if you want to just talk about the fact that people getting help, talk about that. If not, just let me ken your thoughts at this point. Well, I mean, I'm going to take a point for that. Well, for one point, I'm going to argue with you about that. Basically, you said men. I would argue that point. Men aren't the only ones that can have paedophilic acts. I mean, it's maybe the gender egalitarian in me that's jumping out and shouting in my head, but we can't just stigmatise men to say, oh, the paedophiles are men, because they're not. It's the same as the old thing that all homosexuals are paedophiles. That they're not. You know, these are false dichotomies. But you're saying about the stigma against people who are paedophiles getting help. I don't know if this is maybe just because of the fact I live in England, or live in Scotland, sorry, and we have the NHS, the National Health Service. Now, they cover physical ailments, they cover mental conditions, and it's free. Which is, I mean, I understand the fact this is probably the biggest point between the UK and America, because American healthcare, you have to pay for it. You have to either have insurance or the money to pay. So I don't know if this is just the Brit in me that's talking, but if I was a paedophile, I could quite easily, well, say, jump on a train and go to the next city, walk into any hospital and say, I need to speak to somebody about mental health concerns. I have paedophilic thoughts and I think I need treatment to make sure I don't offend. I don't know if there's anything set up like that in America. I mean, I've seen on TV stuff like free clinics and stuff like that. So I don't know. We'll use Omnipolotics as an example here. I don't know if the options available there for Omnipolitics to go to the next city over, for example, tell people that he's going for a day trip, go into a hospital, say that he wants to speak to somebody in mental health care, explain that he has paedophilic thoughts, and will be able to receive help. Like I say, I mean, that might just be a point of living in Britain, because I could quite easily jump on a train, go to the next city over, walk into the hospital, say I am having paedophilic thoughts, and by the end of that day, I will have spoken to at least one mental health professional who will have arranged for me to go to speak to another mental health professional who will then diagnose me, medicate me, whatever the situation is. So saying that removing the stigma is going to help get these people, to my opinion, that's just false, because there are professionals that you can go out and speak to who are not going to have any stigma against you. If you see what I'm talking about. It's maybe just a personal thing, because as I mentioned to you before, there was a time when I felt personally so worthless and so useless and was so deep into my own depression. And I will admit I was one of the lucky ones, because a friend of mine did it to me, where they literally bundled me in a car, drove me to the next city over, unpacked me from the car, physically dragged me into a hospital, took me to a mental health professional, and spoke to the mental health professional on my part and said, I believe this man is suicidal. This is what I have witnessed. And as I say, I will tell you right now, that is the best friend I could have asked for. He told what was going on in his eyes. Mental health professional at that point in time directly asked me, is this true? And I just didn't have the strength in me to hide it. Within 2 weeks, I had been properly diagnosed with having severe, what do you call it? It's the kind of depression. It's isn't it wonderful when words disappear? I can't remember anyway, but point still stands. I mean, I was told at that point in time that I had this form of depression. I was given proper medication. I was told this is a company you can get in contact with in your area. They're free. They offer counselling services. We would recommend you take the antidepressants that you've now been prescribed and that you go and speak to these counsellors. Like I say, at the time, I wasn't working. No financial burden was given to me. So it may be different for the fact of being in the UK with the NHS and being in America where healthcare is a more privatised system. But from what Omnipolitics himself has admitted, from, again, the Worst Case podcast, he has admitted to some members of his family that he is a pedophile. And a lot of the members of his family seem to have just brushed it off. Now, if that's true, in my opinion, they are letting him down. Because as I've already mentioned, I was so deep into my own depression that I was not going to seek help on my own. And if I was left much longer, I would probably have been found dead. I was lucky enough to have a friend who was switched on enough, I suppose you would say, to notice what was going on with me and physically drag me to go get help. Now, we have Omnipolitics here who has gone to members of his family. According to him, he's gone to his parents and said he's having these pedophilic thoughts. They are doing nothing. So would you agree that they are letting him down? See, again, I mean, it's maybe just a personal point. I don't know what the situation is with the family. Like I said, we do have the situation it being America where healthcare isn't free like it is here. But that, to me, if it was one of my boys had come to me and said, I'm having pedophilic thoughts, I would sell body parts to make sure they've got the help they need. Clinical, sorry. The word came back. Clinical depression. Well, again, that just comes down to me as a point of failure by the United States government. Now, if something like that was to happen in the United Kingdom, now I will say, for example, if somebody was to take themselves in the UK to get treatment for the mental condition of paedophilia, we'll say, we have what's called the Data Protection Act. So any healthcare professional that I speak to, for example, if I was to go and speak to a healthcare professional with my diagnosis of depression and I was to volunteer to help with any sort of, like, say, we'll just say a woodworking class, because woodworking is one of my hobbies. If I was to volunteer to help with a woodworking class where I would be left unattended with many sharp instruments, and one of the conditions we'll say is on the paperwork, you can't take this position if you are depressed with suicidal tendencies. I could go and fill in that form and say, I am not depressed and I do not have suicidal tendencies, and they would have no way to check that. Because under the Data Protection Act, the only other person other than the, well, actually, I tell you, they would probably be able to check that under Data Protection Act. But that would be as far as it would go. And under Data Protection Act, they would not be allowed to tell anybody. So I don't know if anything like that would stand in America, but I think the more important point there would be, is this person seeking help? Now, as I've said, I mean, if we were to turn the world into a street, for example, and we're going to have, in my street, I have, let's say, a house at either side of my house. The house on my left-hand side lives Omnipolotics. The house on my right-hand side houses a paedophile who has admitted he's a paedophile but has taken himself to try and get treatment. When I pass both of these people in the street, I will hold my children's hands to make sure that they can't get away from me. But if I was to look out the window and see the neighbour who has tried to get himself help, if I see him going past my garden, and as long as he doesn't stop, there will be no problem. If I see Omnipolitics heading towards his gate, I will be out in the garden. If you see my point, if the kids are out there. So a lot of the stigma that Omnipolitics at this point in time is dealing with, to my opinion, he's dealing with it by his own hand. Because as I've already pointed out to you, if he was to have made a video that said, I am a paedophile, I'm not happy about being a paedophile, but I am a paedophile, and was to make some sort of vlog where he was going through mental health, he was coming out of his meetings and saying, I've just had a discussion, here are my chances of being cured of paedophilia, blah, blah, blah. I would have more respect for that than I am for this person who's wanting to say, I'm a paedophile, this is why I think it's fine. So, I mean, again, I'm going to open the floor up to you. Just, is there anything that you can think about to add to those points, or do you disagree with those points? Or? I mean, this is another thing that I would prefer not to get into, if I'm honest, because this alt-right nonsense is just a load of nonsense. All the alt-right really is, in my opinion, is people who are typically centrist, who are probably more than likely centre-left. So they don't agree with these far-left lunatics that think that everybody should be referring to each other as Z and Zier and Zerself and whatever. But what do you mean by that? Are you talking about politicians who would possibly be wanting to stand up and say, I think paedophilia should be reduced to a non-crime, or something like that? Because I could all but guarantee that's never going to happen. Because as I've said, I mean, even taking my most reasonable position that I can muster for myself, what I would say is that it's all about understanding and harm. Kids between the ages of 3 and 12 that Omnipolitics has said that he's personally in preference of, too young to understand. Now, yeah, we can go to situations like Milo Yiannopoulos that you've probably heard about recently, because at 13 years old, Milo Yiannopoulos lost his virginity apparently to a priest and another man. And now people are jumping up and down saying that he's a paedophile defender, when I don't think he's a paedophile defender. I think he was talking about his own experiences. But at the end of the day, I honestly think Milo Yiannopoulos was a victim of sexual abuse. But because of the way that he looks at the world, he doesn't want to be a victim. So he's quite willing to stand up in public and say, I was not a victim of sexual abuse. I wanted it. I was the predator. So when it comes to stuff like that, I mean, how would you rectify that sort of situation where people are wanting to stand up and say, I was fine with being in a sexual position with two other people when clearly it wasn't ready? I mean, you say yourself you're a fan of Sargon of Akkad. Sargon was talking recently about the whole situation there where he was saying that Milo really doesn't like to be a victim. He hates the idea of being a victim for when Milo sat for when Sargon sat and spoke to Milo, which is one of the reasons apparently why he's so against the modern day victim culture. But like I say, I mean, memory may serve me wrong here, but I actually think that the Milo situation might actually be a fairly bad example. Because if I remember correctly, when Milo would have been about 13 years old, I'm sure that in the United Kingdom we had the staggered age of consent. So the age of consent for a heterosexual act was 16 years old, and the age of consent for a homosexual act was actually 18 years old, if I remember correctly. So that might have caused extra stigma for him to say, I wanted it, I was ready for it. Because if he admits that he wasn't ready for it, it might be an admission, if you will. Because the reason why the age of consent used to be staggered was because people who were homosexual were thought there was a phase they would go through, or they might be confused, so they need that extra time to be sure that it's what they want. So if that's the case, Milo Yiannopoulos coming out and saying, I at 13 years old was in a sexual situation and I wasn't ready for it, that might push homosexual relationships in the United Kingdom backwards to saying, see, we were right to have these extra restrictions on homosexuality because A through B, you know? I think you're right, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the United States seems to be a state by state thing. It seems to range between 16 and 18. And now I can tell you, I live in the UK. The age of consent in the UK is 16. I can't think of a single person who still was a virgin at 16. Well, like I say, I mean, that to me, it just becomes a moot point because I actually think the age of consent in the UK at 16 is probably roughly right. As Milo Yiannopoulos would have said it, I mean, we could nitpick on it because nobody that I could think of ever lost their virginity at 16. Everybody I could think of lost their virginity before the age of 16, but the thing was that we were losing our virginity with people at the same age. So that instantly put statutory rape out the window. And I mean, it's that age, again, as we spoke about before, My kids are going to hit that age eventually. They're going to be told, you have to be careful. We didn't want you ended up with a sexually transmitted disease or with a baby. These are two things that you are not ready for. But I am not stupid enough to sit here and say to you, do nothing, because as I've already said, my peer group at the time, none of us kept our virginity until 16. But like I say, if there was anybody above the age of 16 who was trying to assist one of the people in my peer group in losing their virginity, that to me would have been a problem. We all would have actually had that problem. And looking back, anybody that, I mean, as I've said, I've always been the same. I've always had friends who are male and female. And just using a female as an example, if one of the females in my peer group had been approached by somebody above the age of 16, that person would have been thought instantly as a creep by our own group. Well, I don't know how far we want to go into Japan, because Japan seems to be rather strange at this point in time. I mean, they seem to, after World War II, I think it was, there seemed to be a mass influence from Western culture where there was things like sex toys and things like that that were introduced to the Japanese culture. And instead of it being like normal Western culture would take sex toys and things like that, where, I mean, I think every woman has a vibrator on the nightstand, if you will. I know for a fact every woman I've ever dated has had at least one vibrator, but it's something that comes out when she's alone and bored, you know, whereas in Japan, they seem to be just quite happy to settle for the sex aids. You know, the Japanese culture as it stands just now, from my understanding, they have a problem with birth rate, because a lot of Japanese guys, instead of taking the risk, going out, getting yourself into nightclubs, which I'm going to tell you right now, I can wholeheartedly understand. I haven't been out on a date since 2012, I think. Not including one that I had recently that was just an absolute nightmare because she was triggering my problems, we'll say. I have problems with being touched after my ex-wife, so she kept touching me, and it was, stop it. But from my understanding, the way that Japanese people seem to be these days is they could put the effort in to try and go to nightclubs and whatever, try to meet somebody, get them home, sex, relationship, blah, blah, blah. Or they could have their sex dolls and mantle aids and things like that, which are guaranteed not to say no, you know? That's actually a very good question, to be honest with you, because if you're dealing with a nudist community, then should the children be involved? And I don't know. I honestly don't know how to answer that question, because on the one hand, if it's just a nudist community and these are just people who don't like wearing clothes, I can't see there being a harm in it. But when you talk about kids being involved, are there going to be paedophiles in the group? This is all things that would go through my mind personally. And it's a very good question. I've got to give you your dues on that one, because I'm literally both for and against it at the same time, because the part of me that believes in free speech and free expression says that these people should be allowed. But the part of me that is determined to protect those who are unable to protect themselves says that kids should be nowhere near that. I mean, you're literally dancing on the edge of a double-edged sword there, because, like you say, it could just be a nudist family that aren't doing anything, but somebody could look at that from the outside and say these kids are being groomed. But on the same edge, you could be looking at the same family and saying these people are just nudists. They have the right to express themselves in any way they want. And they could actually be abusing the kids, using the nudism as grooming. I don't know. Again, that becomes an actual decent point for discussion. Oh, like I say, I mean, I'm not saying that you said that. That's not coming from your mind. That is definitely coming from the way I think. Like I say, I mean, I'm very, very protective of my own children. So the unfortunate thing about being as protective to children as I can be, your mind can go to some very deep, dark places. You're actually right on that one. But the big question there is, who's taking the photographs? I mean, it might be a bit unsightly, but if a family's taking photographs of their own kids and they're nudist, that could be their business as long as there's no evidence of abuse. But if Omnipolitics is hanging there the hedge taking photographs of the kids running about naked, that's a problem. They're just kids playing around, and they happen to be in the nudist family. That's self-expression. I mean, things like that just lead on to points like we could use Anissian as an example here. You're bound to have heard about the Anissian debacle a couple of months ago there. Just for anybody that's listening that possibly doesn't know, Anissian was running a forum where he was asking for things like pictures of girls before and after puberty, asking for pictures of scantily clad underage girls so that he could rate their bodies for body positivity. That to me, it's not just creepy, but there's no need. The guy's what, 32 years old, and he was rating the bodies of 13, 14-year-olds. And he keeps going on about there's no problem with it, it's body positivity. Now, most of the girls that I knew at that age would pretend that it had no effect on them, but it would have a massive effect if he was to say anything negative. So I don't know, a minute, we're jumping back and forward here because I take it you're still talking about the nudism point. I mean, things like that, to be honest, are rather easy to deal with in my mind, because if families are going to raise their children to be nudists, that's not a problem. If these people are going to run websites, that's not a problem. Having pictures of the kids on the websites, to me, then becomes a problem. So I would just have things in the forum that say, if you're going to post pictures of your kids, could you please either not post pictures of kids or blur out the pictures, just so we don't end up having to deal with situations. Well, like you say, I mean, it's the old point where people can find porn anywhere. What is it, Rule 32 in the internet? If porn doesn't exist, it will be made. So Yeah, I mean, if there's a market for it, you'll be able to find it through some loophole somewhere. But the key point there is to close the loopholes. And like I say, if it was to come down to pictures of nudist kids on a website, I would either encourage parents not to post pictures of nudist kids or blur any sensitive points or censor any sensitive points. Well, like I say, I mean, most computers these days come with at least some form of video editing software. That every computer I think I've ever worked on since 2000 has come with at least Photoshop. So it's not exactly difficult these days to get your hands on a bit of software that can put a black bar across sexual organs or. To be honest, I think that's just the side effect of a healthy mind, if you will. I mean, I could tell you just now, as I've already said, being a parent and being overprotective, my mind can go to some very dark places. I mean, it's sic this pacem parabellum, I think is the best phrase for that one. If you want peace, prepare for war. Uh, in other words, you make sure that you've thought of the worst possible scenario so that you can think of a way to avoid it before it happens. And like I say, I mean, personal experience has told me that the worst experiences can happen. So my mind's not necessarily healthy, but somebody that hasn't been through the same level of rigor, I suppose, through the ringer, the same as I've been, wouldn't necessarily think about things like that. That would just be a situation of freedom of expression. Again, as long as they're over the age of consent. Well, that then becomes a point. I mean, you can make the same argument about the feminist movement of the 1970s where women were burning their bras. It's not the kind of thing I would do because, from my understanding, bras are expensive. People could say that would be a public act of voyeurism. But like I say, I mean, at the same point, if somebody was to go along with a 15, 16-year-old girl and say, right, you can burn your bra as well with the rest of us, wouldn't necessarily have a problem with it as long as it was done properly. I mean, we've all seen the videos on the internet or the episode of Friends, for example, where I think it was they needed Monica's bra and she managed to take her bra off without even taking her shirt off. And I think every woman on the planet gets how to do that. Because I could tell you the name, my ex-wife used to do it regularly when she needed to change her bra, but wasn't want to get totally undressed. So it seems to be a skill that a lot of women have. So if this young girl kens how to take her bra off to burn it, for example, as long as you're not seeing anything, not a problem. If she is encouraged by her mother to lift up her top to take her bra off, that's a problem. Well, that's, again, it just comes back to my original point. I mean, the big reason why I'm against any form of paedophilia is because of understanding and harm. Like I say, kids at Omnipolotics' range, they're not old enough to understand. I mean, as I've already given you the example, my son, he kens how my circular saw works, but in his mind it's magic. He kens how to physically make it work, he doesn't mentally understand how it works. Can't see it being any different with sex. But if he was to have sex at this age, he's going to hit the age where he's going to realise it's wrong and it's going to impact him again. I mean, I've already got that to worry about because the abuse that they underwent for their mother, they're going to hit an age eventually where, because when I was told about the abuse, it was a very throwaway statement. I mean, the reason why I found out about the abuse was because I was tidying up my house, and I'll be the first one to tell you I'm a typical guy. I have this really low shelf in my house. Most people call it the floor. So, I mean, I go to bed at night and it's like the belt comes off the trousers and gets dropped on the floor, and the trousers get dropped on the floor, and, you know, that's how it goes. Kids were tidying up my room, and I'd picked up my belt and I'd wrapped it around my hands, and my son just about went running. And I said to him, "What's wrong with you?" "I didn't want to hit with the belt." I said, "I'm not going to hit you with the belt. I'm just putting it away." So, "But I didn't want to hit with the belt, Dad." "I'm not going to hit you with the belt. Getting hit with the belt hurts." "I'm not going to hit you with a..." "How do you care getting hit with a belt hurts? Who's been hitting you with a belt?" And that was the point where I can honestly tell you, I mean, I lost all rational thought at that moment. And I literally had a friend of mine on the phone, and I was saying to him, "I need you to bring your wife along here. Your wife needs to sit with the kids. Me and you are going to go through to my now ex-wife's house to get our hands on her new partner, and we're going to teach him a lesson he's not going to forget." Because at that moment in time, for all the bad things that she'd done to me, I never thought that she would do anything like that to the kids. So, like I say, I was literally on the phone to my mate, saying to him, "We are going to go through and we are going to turn this guy into a funny red paste." And I was still the wee boy. "So who's been hitting you with a belt, pal?" Because all that I wanted him to say was the name of the new partner of my ex-wife. Because at that moment, all I wanted was confirmation so that I had the reason that I needed to turn him into that red paste. But he said, "Mummy has been hitting me with a belt." So that was the point where rational thoughts sort of returned. Because as I've already mentioned, I've never hit women in my life, and I've no intention to hit a woman. So that was the point where I said to my mate, "Forget what I just said. I'm going to phone you later. I need to go and speak to a lawyer." But like I say, I mean, I know what's going to happen. We are going to get to a point, because my oldest son still remembers what happened. He doesn't understand why he still remembers, but he still remembers because I've never done anything like that. That's the big point. You know, it's outside of the norm. Normal behaviour when he does something wrong is I will shout loud enough to shatter the neighbour's windows and tell him to go to his room. You know, it's typical parent stuff. Whereas, from my understanding, if he would do something minorly out of touch at his mother's house, he would get hit with a belt. So, even to this day, we still have moments where he's convinced that physical punishment's coming, and I'm not into physical punishment. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, all that physical punishment teaches children is that I'm bigger than you, I tell you, or I'll hit you. Which, to me, all that does is lead down a path of you're doing something I don't appreciate, and I'm bigger than you, so I will hit you. So I would rather have my moment where the kids have done something seriously wrong, have a shout, tell them to get out of my sight, calm myself down, bring them back to where I am, and have a conversation about it. Explain to them why they're wrong. And like I said, the example that I've been given by Andy Worski, by people that I personally know that have been abused, and by my own kids, is that these things, although they didn't understand why it's wrong, it becomes pervasive in their thinking. So my boys are going to hit an age where they're going to understand why it's wrong, and then it's going to be all they think about. That's going to be the point where I'm going to be dealing with more child psychologists and such. And this is what Omnipolitics seems to be pushing for. So like I say, I mean, it's maybe a biased point, but it's the point that I would put forward. And like I say, Omnipolitics, the way that he's done this whole thing, was there going to be anything other than hate in his direction? Because as I've already said, yeah, a very bitter pill to swallow, but if Omnipolitics had made his video saying, I am a pedophile, but I don't want to be a pedophile. Like I say, hard pill to swallow, but at least it's a sort of positive message to say, I want to change. Omnipolitics has made series of videos that basically say, I'm a pedophile, I'm okay with being a pedophile, here's why you should be okay with me being a pedophile, here's why you should be okay with me having a relationship with your child. So would you agree with that point? Well, I mean, I've already spoke about the point that was made by Omnipolitics that, as far as he's concerned, the parents should be involved and there should be a relationship between, using him as an example, there should be a relationship between him and the parents of whatever girl he would be, and I'm making quote marks in the air here, dating. So, well, as I've already said, I mean, as a parent personally, I could never give consent like that because I know that there is no understanding of sexual acts there, and I believe that to be predatory. So would you argue that point? Would you say that it's not predatory, or? And you're going to have to explain that one to me. So you are agreeing with me that it's a predatory action? Now, I'm starting to wonder if you're just saying yes because you heard my reaction there, because my reaction was rather shocked. Because I would have thought anybody would have seen that as a predatory action to go to somebody else's parent and say, I'm interested in your child. Well, it's not just the case, it would be quite weird, it would be quite disgusting in my opinion. I mean, as I've already driven home, especially with Omnipolitics, he's been on public record to say that he is attracted to children of the age between 3 and 12, with a preference of the age of 7, because that's when they start to apply logic to the world. So he likes to know that these children are applying logic to their surroundings. Problem is that exact same logic I have seen myself. For example, my son was hit with a belt. My son was physically disciplined by his mother excessively when he did things that were considered wrong. Problem is that things that she was considering wrong, from my understanding, were like wanting attention. Because from my understanding, what was happening in that house was my now ex-wife was sitting all night and all day playing World of Warcraft and paying no attention to the children when they were there. So if he would cry and refuse to calm, he would get hit with a belt. If, put it this way, there's probably hundreds of things that you would mention that would be normal child behaviour that any other parent would just say, come here, sit down, come on, cuddle in, we'll watch the telly for a while. Instead of having that reaction, my son was getting hit with a belt. Now he's hit that point where he applies logic to the world, and logic to him says that when people are doing things that annoy you, you hit them. So if I was to apply that same logic to the way omnipolitics is, I don't know how that would affect a child, to be honest. I mean, I have heard stories on the internet that say from girls who have been abused. There was one girl that, I mean, I remember it because it almost haunted my nightmares, where a girl had been abused by a member of the family, and every time she was abused, she was given treats. And she figured out exactly how to pleasure men. And she would do things like jump up on friends of her father and do these things that, unbeknownst to her, would give these men orgasms, and these men would then reward her. That is her then applying logic to the world to say, I want a sweet, I have to do these certain things. So would you not personally find that disgusting? Or? I mean, especially in the case of the adults in those situations, because the adults in those situations, as far as I'm concerned, should have known better. When things like that started, especially the first time it happened, that was the point when, if it had been me, I would have said to the child to stop, and I would have sat and explained that is not something that makes me feel comfortable. Now, this girl, for the sounds of it, was just unlucky. She was surrounded by people who were wanting to take advantage of her. But like I say, I mean, as a father personally, that is the point where I would sit down and explain to her, you can't do things like that to people because it makes them uncomfortable. Children will understand that. They don't understand why it's uncomfortable, but they'll understand it makes you uncomfortable. And at that point, the only thing they're interested in is themselves. As I've already said, this girl supposedly learned to do these things because she would then get treats. And if somebody was to have sat down with her at that time and said, you can't do that, it makes me uncomfortable, the only thing she's thinking is, if it makes this person uncomfortable, they will not give me treats. Now, it's maybe a very strange example of child logic, but it's the sort of logic that would be applied by children in those situations. So do you think that that would be a reasonable way to approach children? You know, this is the point that applying logic to the world. Logically speaking, if this girl in hypothetical does certain things and pleases Omnipolitics, the next day he takes her out and buys her a My Little Pony or a Barbie or whatever. So she then learns that whatever these acts are gets her rewards. Is that right? I mean, like I say, that then just becomes a point where it's a Pavlovian response. She doesn't necessarily understand why she's getting these rewards. She just understands that she is getting these rewards. That's as far as the logic goes. So is it right that this girl is treated in that way? Well, I would definitely agree with you on that one. So I'm actually going to take this opportunity to wrap this conversation up, because at the moment it is 3 o'clock in the morning. And it's one of the joys of being, unfortunately, suffering with cancer, because people took my children out for me today, so I ended up sleeping all day. So I have to get to sleep, or else the kids are going to be kicking me out of bed in the morning. But I would like to take the opportunity to say it has been nice to have this conversation with you. I don't necessarily agree with a lot of the points that you've raised, but I could see where you're coming from. And I do honestly believe that I might have changed your opinion on things. Unfortunately, you haven't changed my opinion. But the opinion that I am holding of you at this point in time is you've gone into a situation out of compassion, and you've just picked the wrong horse. You've picked an example of somebody who's saying that they want it to be okay for him to be a paedophile so that he could sleep with children between the ages of 3 and 12. And you've thought this guy is just looking for the stigma of paedophilia to go away so that these people can get help. Now, if I'm wrong on that one, you're more than welcome to take this opportunity to correct me. Well, that's fine. Like I say, I mean, I like to think that there has been some form of education on the points that were raised by Omnipolitics, and the reason why people have spat so much vitriol at them, including myself, to be honest. I mean, in private conversations, I have been no friend to Omnipolitics, and I don't think I would ever be a friend to Omnipolitics because of what he's trying to justify. But I am not going to try to crucify you, because in my mind, I think that you are just quite simply compassionate, because I wouldn't be surprised by the fact that you go by CovertBrony. I am willing to bet the fact that you have spent time on online forums as a brony and have, well, social media, and have felt similar vitriol because people seem to associate things like being a brony with being a pedophile, which is wrong. Well, we'd have to take your word on a lot of those ones. The only example that I could personally think of is a guy that I know personally who used to do battle reenactments in, like, hand swords. I'm sure the Americans have got some similar, some sort of combat fighting league where they get dressed up in suits of armour and use medieval weapons. This is what the guy does. It's basically for reenactments. The guy's also a furry and is bisexual. So he has had the stigma of bisexuality, he's had the stigma of being a furry, and he's had a lot of things said about him that are just flat out wrong. So to that extent, I could agree that you're right. I mean, a lot of stigma is attached to certain things that doesn't need to be attached to these things. But like I say, I mean, I was wanting to have this conversation with you because you seem to be rather ignorant in your defence of a man who's willing to stand on a public forum and say, I am a pedophile and it's fine that I'm a pedophile. And like I say, I honestly think that it's possibly been because of the amount of stigma you yourself might have suffered, where you're looking at this situation with sympathy, saying, I get accused of being a pedophile all the time and I'm not a pedophile. Maybe this guy's getting the same level of stigma, but unfortunately, he's a self-confessed pedophile. So you've sort of hitched your cart to the wrong horse there. Well, I mean, there's no way for that channel to avoid the controversy, because I can honestly say Well, I'm quite happy to have a discussion with yourself. I have my opinions on why you have been trying to defend Omnipolitics, which I'm going to be perfectly honest here, just for the point of honesty. I could be wrong. I mean, for all I know, and I'm not accusing you here, I want to make that perfectly clear, but for all I know, you could actually be a pedophile, but at least you're not shouting about it for the rooftops, if you will. I don't believe you're a pedophile. I believe that you are somebody with compassion who is looking at the wrong situation. If somebody saying, I'm a pedophile, and you're thinking to yourself, well, for one thing, I get accused of being a pedophile all the time, and I'm not a pedophile. And for another thing, the stigma behind pedophilia needs to go away so these people can get help and not be pedophiles anymore, if you will. So, like I say, I mean, that it could just be wishful thinking on my part. I seriously doubt it is, but I don't believe that you're hitching your cart to his wagon because you're in any way defending him. I think it's just a case of you believe for the mental health situation, which I think we've already covered to this point. Yeah, I mean, like I say, some of your arguments were definitely wrong. There's no other way to say it, unfortunately. Like we say, I mean, I've already covered the point where you were trying to equate pedophilia with homosexuality, where I personally would equate pedophilia to psychopathy. Yeah. Homosexuals don't harm anybody. Psychopaths and pedophiles do. But it's been an interesting conversation, if nothing else. So I want to take the opportunity to thank you for being brave enough to join me. Well, it's maybe not as open as you would think, but at least we can have this conversation and dialogue. Like I say, I mean, it's the mindset of a father. If I was to find out anybody did anything to my kids, best case scenario, I'm going to prison. Worst case scenario, I don't get caught. You know? But the point of the fact of the matter is, it has to be my kids, or at least kids that I know. But again, like I say, I'm going to thank you for joining me for this conversation. I doubt you'll be defending Omnipolitics as vehemently anytime soon, but I can't necessarily say that's a bad thing, because as far as I'm concerned, the guy doesn't need any defence, especially after, like I've said, the Andy Worski situation, where a guy says I was abused, and his biggest response is, did you understand that pedophilia was bad? Had your parents told you? Like I say, that's probably just one that, as a parent myself, the heckles just went up, because it's not the kind of thing you talk about with your kids. I don't sit and have long drawn out conversation with my children about if pedophiles come near you, you runs in. I would rather my children live in a world where pedophiles didn't exist, because as far as they're concerned, they don't. So I'm going to take the opportunity to anybody who's watching in the future, to anybody who's watching now, I'm going to take the opportunity to say good night. If you believe it, God bless. If you don't, whatever. I'll hopefully catch you another time if I'm feeling up to it again. As I've mentioned before, unfortunately at the moment I am battling cancer, so videos have been going few and far between. Treatment should be finished within the next couple of months, so hopefully I'm going to pick up again on more videos, more stuff like that. So catch you guys later.